Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Don Parkinson, and I'd like to welcome you back to another in our series of NRL live streaming sessions and radio shows. Every other week on Wednesdays at this same time, we will discuss a new topic and want to encourage you to provide as much input as possible by calling or texting us with your questions or comments. You can call or text us toll free at 1 844 424 0500. That's 1 424 0500. We also play music during this hour of power, and we will accept requests from you, but you have to provide a comment or question about the project. So there's one string attached to that. So just to remind everyone, we're doing these radio shows and streaming sessions to help community members and the general public get a better understanding of exactly what's involved in the federal impact assessment and the provincial environmental assessment processes, and generally to encourage viewers and listeners to participate in both of these activities. So, with me today is my usual co host, Qasim Sadiq, who is the project co lead for the Northern Road Link project. Good afternoon, Qasim. As always, we got a lot to talk about this week. It's a busy time now, isn't it?
Good afternoon, Don. It certainly is. It's just and a good time of the year to have these interesting water-based conversations with the weather warming up and people thinking a little bit more about the outdoors. So it is a timely discussion for today as people start heading out on the land.
Yeah, very much so, Qasim, very much. And today's session, as you discussed, is called Field Studies, Groundwater and Surface Water. So during today's presentation, we're going to talk about the different groundwater and surface water investigations that are and will be done as part of this environmental or impact assessment. Um, and there are a lot of studies. There's a lot of effort and emphasis placed on water for very good reasons. It's such a critical part of the environmental assessment or the impact assessment, and so important to community members as well. So we should probably get started. Maybe, Qasim, you can do a quick run through about what we're going to cover today.
Yeah, let's start there, Don. That's a great idea. So let's look at what we cover this afternoon. We'll start with going over objectives of field studies. Why are we doing the field studies that we're doing? Then we talk about what will be studied. In this case, we talk about groundwater. Then we talk about surface water. So, like I said at the start, today's topic of discussion really is two of the key sort of signature studies that we conduct within environmental assessment related to water. The first one being groundwater, and the second one being surface water. So both are discussed today. We talk about the study areas for groundwater and surface water. Then we talk about the content nature of the field studies for both groundwater and surface water. Lastly, we talk about potential mitigation methods before we leave our audience with our contact information.
Thanks, Qasim, and maybe we can start off our more detailed discussion with a description of the objectives of the groundwater and surface water field studies, and these are more general in nature, but uh, the main one is to identify and consider the effects on groundwater and surface water from the project itself. And then another objective is the mitigation part of things. So we know there's no project that doesn't have any effects whatsoever. Um, those don't exist. And so, when it comes to mitigation, it's providing those detailed mitigation recommendations and measures um, to help minimize effects. That's what mitigation really means. It means minimizing or limiting. Sometimes you can eliminate effects, but most of the time it's minimizing the effects. So that those are the two main objectives: identifying potential effects and then providing recommendations as to how to to minimize those effects as much as possible. Um, Maybe now, Qasim, you can go through just what will be assessed in the groundwater, the studies regarding groundwater.
So groundwater, like I said, it's one of the key things that at least in this part of Northern Ontario, that we do want to study in addition to surface water. So let's talk a little bit about what will be studied with groundwater. The first aspect is quantity. How much groundwater exists in the study area. So, with that, you're trying to assess potential changes to groundwater recharge and discharge areas as well. Groundwater level, which includes sort of seasonal changes, because as we know, in Northern Ontario, seasonal changes related to water can be quite significant. And then you'll want to look at groundwater flow and movement by trying to understand the soil, because the soil dictates many characteristics associated with groundwater. Now, of course, this includes peatlands and the muskeg in the case of Northern Ontario for the Northern Road Link. You want to look at bedrock geology, groundwater level and saturated thickness, and significant recharge areas as well. Then you're trying to define the potential zone of influence that the project, including supporting infrastructure required to develop the project, may have on groundwater quantity or flow movement. So you're really trying to look at it holistically. You're trying to look at it from the perspective of what exists there, what changes occur over different seasons, and then you're trying to look at impacts both from the perspective of the project itself, which is the road in our case, but then those initial temporary structures required for construction. Now, in addition to groundwater quantity, you also want to study groundwater quality. So, in our case, we'll be assessing the physical, chemical, and biological properties of groundwater. And those can change as a result of the project. Some ways that they could change. You want to try and determine the proximity of sensitive groundwater features such as drinking water supply wells and springs and highly vulnerable aquifers in the area in order for us to understand what the supply road and supporting infrastructure, example aggregates, quarries, and pits, could do to the overall quality of the groundwater. So that's the general assessment being done in terms of groundwater. Don, we're looking at, if I had to sum it up, I'd say we're trying to look at both quantitative aspects of it, so how the quantity associated with groundwater, as well as the quality of groundwater within the project area.
Thanks, Qasim. And groundwater is extremely important to community members, not only for drinking purposes, but just for because it's representative of the overall health of 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 the water resources in the region, in the traditional territory. And I know from experience meeting with communities and community members, um, that's always water is almost always at the top of the list of concerns because it is so fundamentally important to community members. And I hope through these kinds of sessions that we're having that community members will get a better understanding and appreciation for how much emphasis is placed on groundwater and surface water in terms of studies as part of an environmental or impact assessment. So, um, well, I think it's time for our first song of the day. But before I do that, I'll remind everyone that they can call or text us toll free at 1-844 424-0500. That's 1-844-424-0500. If you have if you would like to suggest a song for us to play, you have to give us a comment or question about the project, and but we welcome that, and we'll definitely play your song, your suggested song. So I think it's time to look at our first song of the day, and I think we're going to go with a band. We're going to feature a band today called The Cult, and the lead singer of it is of British origin, but it's an interesting story. It has ties to um, the Indigenous community because he moved as a child to Hamilton, Ontario, and then became was on a field trip as a young student to Six Nations Reserve and began to learn more about Indigenous culture and became really interested in it and has as a result made it part of his art. And so a lot of the music that the cult plays has references, Indigenous cultural references. So let's listen to the cult. First song up is called Sweet Soul Sister. So if our technical team can bring that song up, we'll listen to that.
Okay up, Dan.
Yeah. Great. Let's listen to Sweet Soul Sister, and then we'll come back and continue our conversation. Okay, let's move on now to talk about what will be studied regarding surface water. And similar to what Cossum was talking about with groundwater, we're looking at both quantity and quality. In terms of quantity, we'll be looking at assessing possible changes to to stream flows, to water levels, and erosion and sediment processes at those water body crossings. Those water body crossings are where the road crosses the different water courses, whether they're creeks, streams, rivers, or lakes. And then also changes to the overall drainage patterns caused by the project. So that's a big part of the surface water study work. So, for example, looking at the number and type of water body crossings. So the width of the crossings. So how would it affect flows? How would it affect water levels? And all this has to be assessed. Does How would runoff rates be affected by the construction of a 2-lane gravel road through such an area, and how does it affect um, the physical landscape in terms of the shape of the land, um, which would then have effects on drainage patterns, and with changes to drainage patterns, what effects would it have on a possible erosion and sedimentation? So erosion is soil loss, and sedimentation is that soil then getting into the water courses, the rivers, the streams, the lakes, and then settling in the bottom. So that's, in terms of quantity, that's what's being will be looked at. And then when it comes to quality, similar to with groundwater, we're looking at changes to biological, chemical, physical properties of surface water, um, by looking at possible increases in the concentration of things like suspended solids, um, or different chemicals, um, that might have been caused by the construction of the road. Um, and these may be caused by just uh, erosion of the road. That's a possibility. Could be caused by sort of incidents such as fuel spills, although, you know, typically in design you would design ways of ensuring containment of these spills so that they don't cause larger problems. And of course, all these things are looked at during different phases of the project, and Cossum's going to get into that actually right now by talking about the temporal boundaries. So Cossum, I'll hand that one over to you.
And that's another important aspect of studying water, whether that's groundwater or surface water, which is the temporality of the study. Or another way of saying that is the time horizon that we're considering. That you conduct a study and you do it at one point in time, and you might be doing it over a number of years, but it represents that time in a timeline. So to be able to assess what the project means from a quality impact perspective, you need to look at a longer time horizon. So in our case, we're looking at the construction phase, which is a 3 to 10 year time horizon potentially, where all the activities associated with the initial development of the road and ancillary infrastructure that is considered. Then you're looking at the operations phase. Now, I know for those of us who've read the tour closely, you know that there's no decommissioning proposed for the project, which means the project is anticipated to go on and operate permanently. But for the purposes of some of the assessments we're conducting, we have to assume a time horizon for which we sort of assess our impact. So the operating phase for this baseline valued component is assumed to be 75 years. So all activities associated with the operation and maintenance of the road, and any sort of permanent ancillary infrastructure, for example, things like operating and maintenance yards, aggregate pits that you need to keep a road intact, uh, and all of these things start after construction. We assume they continue indefinitely. But for this valued component, we look at the operations phase for assessment purposes for 75 years. So that's the temporality associated with a study related to water, groundwater, and surface water. Don.
Thanks for that, Qasim. And again, just to underline what you were saying, the project, and we've said this on in previous shows, the project is not just the two-lane road. It is all the temporary and permanent ancillary, meaning additional infrastructure associated with the road. So the gravel pits, the access roads to the gravel pits and quarries, the camps, the construction camps, the lay down areas for materials and equipment. So all of that sort of comprises the project. And I think we're ready for another musical selection here. I'll just remind our listeners that they can call or text us toll free at 1-844-424-0500. That's 1-844-424-0500. If you have a song request, you can submit that, and we will honor it as long as you give us a comment or question about the project. So let's continue on our musical journey with the cult and listen to a song called Firewoman. So if our team can bring that up, I'm sure it's at their fingertips.
We got it.
Let's listen to Firewoman from the cult, and then we'll come back and continue our conversation. Okay, welcome back, everyone. Hope you enjoyed Firewoman by The Cult. And now we're ready to move on and talk about the study areas for groundwater and surface water, starting with groundwater. So we have three levels of study areas. The first is the project footprint, and the extent of that is the right of way of the project and the other associated construction and operation areas. So that's the what we call ancillary infrastructure we were talking about. So that includes the laydown yards, the storage yards, the construction camps, the access roads, any access roads, um, infrastructure associated with access roads to get to pits and quarries to get the material to build the road with and to maintain the road. So that's the actual footprint of the project, and that's the area of direct disturbance, the physical area required for project construction and operation. Then we move to what's called the local study area, or LSA, and the LSA is 1 kilometer from the project footprint. So it extends out 1 kilometer additionally beyond the project footprint. And that's sort of the area where you get largely direct and indirect of the projects, and that's where those are likely to occur. And then there's another level of study area called the regional study area, but in this case, in the case of groundwater, it's not expected to extend beyond what the local study area is. So for this project, the local study area, and for groundwater, the local study area and the regional study area are essentially the same thing. So um, that's that is basically the area of influence of the project when it comes to groundwater. And Casa, maybe you can talk a little bit now about the surface water study areas.
Yes, Don. So similar to the groundwater study area that you just talked about, we've got the local study area as well as the regional study area. And with surface water, it's a bit of a watershed approach. So for the local study area or the LSA, that encompasses the quaternary watersheds crossed by the project corridor, and the rationale for that is that the LSA is defined primarily for the purposes of data collection and to characterize existing environmental conditions. So you do it around the project area. But for the regional study area, the RSA encompasses the catchment areas as defined by a tertiary watershed scale of each water body which is crossed by the project corridor. So essentially, upstream to the headwaters and downstream to the James Bay or Hudson Bay. So the rationale for that is that this encompasses the area outside of the LSA, which is used to measure broader scale existing environmental conditions, and then provide regional context for the maximum predicted geographic extent of direct and indirect effects of the project. For example, to be look at changes to downstream surface water quality. So in terms of the regional study area, it's actually quite large and quite comprehensive, Don.
Yeah, it definitely is, Cosm. And again, as you mentioned, it's based on drainage areas, on watersheds, and I mean, there's different levels of watersheds, and but it's quite logical. It makes complete sense when you think about it, based on that description. So, just wanted to remind our listeners that they can call or text us toll free at 1-844-424-0500. That's 1-844-424-0500. We also take song requests. If you would like to request a song, we will honor that if you give us a comment or question about the project. We always are interested in your comments or questions about the project, aren't we, Gossam?
Absolutely, Don. We certainly are, and without that participation, Don and I can do just what we do, which we think is quite comprehensive, but it only improves with that participation, I think.
That's right, and with your input, that helps shape the environmental assessment, the impact assessment, and makes it a better product and gives us all confidence, including the confidence of both Martin Falls and Webequie community members, that this project is one that's a good project, and it can be done and built in a way that protects the environment. So let's now go to our third song of the day, and another one from our friends at the Cult, and this one is called Rain. So if our team can pull up Rain by the Cult, we will listen to that. And it sounds like they're very busy trying to find that one. It must be very
We got
obscure.
it.
They have it? Okay, so let's listen to Rain by the Cult, and we'll come back and continue our conversation on the field studies. Okay, we're back. Hope everyone enjoyed Rain by the Cult. And now we're moving on to talk about the field studies, and I'll kick things off by talking about the groundwater field studies, and this is pretty intensive work. Takes a lot of effort in remote areas such as this to do this kind of work. It's typically done in the winter. It has to be done by helicopter. It involves moving some rather heavy equipment into place to drill groundwater monitoring wells, and so it's this is very challenging work. And the plan is to have 12 groundwater monitoring wells installed along the preliminary preferred corridor, and near potential extraction areas. And groundwater level monitoring and water quality sampling will be done in different seasons, spring, summer, and fall. Obviously, in the winter, everything's frozen up. It's much more difficult to get those readings. Um, but the point of it is to understand the variations in the levels of groundwater. And so, when they install a well, they install piezometers, and piezometers um, allow you to measure the depth to groundwater, so you can understand how the groundwater levels change. And then, of course, as you probably recall, we talked earlier about how it's about quality, water quality as well. So samples are taken of the groundwater, and these samples are analyzed at labs for a whole suite of different things, including the physical parameters such as pH, which is a measure of acidity of the water, temperature, um, the hardness of the water, so the sort of the mineral content, and turbidity, the clarity of the water, total suspended solids, which is similar to that, total dissolved solids, and then chemical composition of the water, so metals, organic and inorganic compounds, so compounds that contain carbon and those that don't contain carbon, and then cations and nutrients and radionuclides. So when we send these samples to the lab, we're getting a wide range of chemical analysis done on these samples. And the reason why we do that is because we need to get that baseline, to get that clear understanding of, what is the water typically like, because every area is different. And so, we may see high levels of one chemical in the water in the area, and that may be just natural, right? So we don't know that until we collect these samples and establish that baseline. And I've talked about this before, and Qasim has as well, about how important it is to characterize those existing conditions, to get that snapshot of the environment, to understand those baseline conditions, because without that, it's very difficult to predict um, effects down the road. Pun intended. It's very difficult to make those predictions unless you know the way things are now. So um, there's a lot of effort put into this, with the by through the installation of the wells, through revisiting these sites to get the water levels, and to take the samples as well too, and then of course the analysis that's done at the lab. So it's a pretty intensive investigation. This component of it. And Qasim, maybe you can talk a little bit now about the surface water field studies.
Yeah, so it's a very similar story for surface water as well. The only, of course, simplifying factor is that this is surface water at the end of the day. So collection of surface water is just made a little simpler by the fact that you don't need to go through the same level of physical activity and exercise to collect it as you do with the groundwater program, but that still doesn't reduce the challenge of the remote area that we're talking about here, Don. For this project for surface water, the surface water program samples will be collected from each of the 15 high priority water body crossing sites. And these samples will be collected in spring, summer, and fall to establish that seasonal variation in existing conditions. And just to be able to do that, again, this is a remote area. Access challenges are very, very significant, which hopefully this road gets to solve in the future. But for now, to investigate surface water, you've got to go on helicopter for the most part to access this place and do it in 3 different seasons. So it's no small challenge, just slightly simpler than the program for groundwater. Water quality parameters for surface water sampling program, again, they'll be the same as those that you discussed for groundwater, Dawn. In terms of water body information, where feasible, water depth and flow data will also be collected at water bodies to characterize existing hydrology. Otherwise, flow will be established by prorating or estimating flows from previously collected flow data in local and regional study areas for the project. So, modeling of existing data allows us to create a very comprehensive picture, but nonetheless, that sort of on the ground information for water depth and flow data is also being collected at water bodies to be able to really comprehensively understand surface water in the project area, Don.
That's right, Cossum. And that what you just talked about there, collecting flow information, and even water depth information, uh, it's so helpful in that modeling process. And the modeling process feeds into other aspects of this work. Particularly on the preliminary engineering side, where our engineering team can use that information to sort of come up with sizing for water crossing structures and typing them as well too, identifying what type of structure, and then if, for example, if it's a culvert, what what size of culvert, and then they would put in other factors as well to that look at maybe climate change, right? Factoring in climate change and making sure that there's a factor of safety for climate change when designing a crossing structure. So there's a lot of that field information. It's very helpful to other disciplines, other specialties in the project. So I think this is pretty important work. I mean, the surface water field monitoring work is pretty important, and we can't be everywhere. We can't sample everywhere, but we definitely try to prioritize and capture as much information from representative water body crossing areas too. So I think we're ready for another song, and then this is another selection from the Cult. So let's go now to listen to a song that was a pretty big hit. It's called She Sells Sanctuary by the Cult. So if our team can bring that one up, we will come back and wrap things up in the final stretch. So if our
All queued up,
team
Don.
has that. All right, so let's listen to She Sells Sanctuary, and then we'll come back and talk about potential mitigation methods. Okay, we are back. That was She Sells Sanctuary by The Cult. And now we're in the home stretch here, Kasim, and I will start things off on potential mitigation methods by talking a bit about how during the construction phase, uh, trying to put some protective measures in place that that will limit potential effects on groundwater and surface water, because there are guidelines or criteria that have been set by the provincial and federal government when it comes to quality of groundwater and surface water. So to avoid exceeding those guidelines, because of course we have to do testing during the construction phase. Um, some of the things that we could do to limit those or mitigate those negative effects on groundwater and surface water quality might be to select locations for equipment, materials, and discharge points away from water bodies to the greatest degree possible, and other sensitive features, whatever those may be. So that's one approach. Another approach might be to treat any or remove any suspended solids, so silt or sediment, um, that's running off during the construction, during like certain construction operations like road grading, or if we're doing dewatering, so removing water from an area in order to be able to do construction, road construction, making sure that runoff is treated, or at least has the suspended solids removed to the greatest degree possible. Another approach, and this is one that many people I'm sure have seen before, is the use of erosion and sediment control. So filter bags, silt fences, erosion control blankets, and all what this does is prevent soil loss, and that soil loss, that soil that's lost, if it's not captured through these kinds of controls, it ends up in many cases in the water courses, and it can affect and damage aquatic habitats. So that's one approach that could be used. Also, and I mentioned this earlier, monitoring and testing groundwater and surface water during construction to make sure that that the construction team has the appropriate measures in place to make sure that there are no exceedances of the provincial and federal guidelines. And then another potential mitigation method is to identify those temporary sites or the permanent sites for whether it's construction camps, whether it's lay down areas, or gravel pits or quarries. Put them in areas to limit the potential effects on groundwater and surface water too. So those are some potential mitigation methods. And Kasim, I know you've got a few of them as well too, don't you?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's look at some further potential mitigation methods associated with groundwater and surface water. You want to identify sites for supportive infrastructure, which includes temporary laydown and storage areas and construction camps, including access roads leading up to those construction camps and sites. And you want to identify them in a way that you minimize and or avoid adverse effects to surface water and groundwater resources. You've got two choices. One runs very close or has the potential of having runoff effect on surface water, and the other one doesn't. Then that becomes a simple choice. Just by moving from one location to another, you've minimized the potential impact you could have had there. So, following that philosophy, you want to identify best suited structure types, whether that's culverts or bridges, span length, life cycle, and construction staging methods at water body crossings. Because just by the choice of some of these different construction, either types, materials, or methods, you can minimize the impact that you have while that is during construction or throughout operations in the future. Then you can design watercourse crossings to account for potential future increases in flood intensities, which we know, based on future projections for climate change models, is something quite significant to consider. And honestly, Don, I don't think we even have to talk to people about that. That is what the models are saying. I think people can see that for themselves in the future.
Yes.
So
Yes.
absolutely, that's something we've got to account for a project like this. So the engineering of the project gets really dictated by how we want to mitigate the potential impact of the project on groundwater and surface water. Similarly, design permanent watercourse crossing, drainage inlets, and outlet locations with rock protection to mitigate potential erosion during operations. Erosion or erosive effects become an important thing to consider, and the potential possibility of leaching that exists within that. So those are all the different things you've got to consider from a design perspective. Then lastly, you want to implement operations and maintenance grading techniques and material storage best management practices to minimize that erosion of potential transport of sediment laden runoff. Now that's a lot of jargon for something you've already explained on. That water that goes across a lot of these structures has the potential to create runoff, and that includes sediment laden runoff, which is essentially small gravel, rock, other materials, soil that the water can carry that gets to sort of lay down in waters in different type of water courses, including rivers, and creates a new bed, a new sort of sedimentation, which without such potential human intervention would not have existed. So you want to avoid that. And you want to minimize the potential for that as well. And all of that gets taken into account, from the design of the road to the location of the road structures to access materials, camps, locations for different source materials as well. So much goes into consideration to be able to mitigate potential effects on groundwater and surface water. So those are all the different things, Don. I think the larger teams will have to sort of grapple with. But I think we're starting a project at a level of baseline collection, which is quite remarkable. So I feel fairly confident in saying that I think we're starting off at a fairly high level of integrity and sort of baseline data collection. And hopefully, Don, we get to hear from community members, from our neighbors, from the general public to help us improve this even further.
That's so true, Qasim. And that wraps up today's NRL discussion. And thank you, Qasim, as always, for sharing your thoughts in today's discussion. And I hope our viewers found it helpful in understanding the field studies associated with groundwater and surface water. And we'll be back again in 2 weeks when we talk about air, noise, and vibration field studies. So don't forget to visit our website at northernroadlink.ca or follow us on social media via NRL Roadlink. Miigwech, and we will see you in 2 weeks.
Thank you so much.